podcast. And today we've got a super exciting guest for you. Brady Brim-DeForest is the CEO of Formula.Monks, which is the technology innovation services side of Sir Martin Sorrell's S4 Capital. And he is the author of a new business book called Smaller is Better, Using Small Autonomous Teams to Drive the Future of Enterprise. Brady, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it. It's really a pleasure to connect.
Yeah, awesome, man. So let's just dive into it. I know you've had a host of experiences before you joined S4 and I guess you S4 acquired your company, your fifth startup, correct?
That is spot on. Yes, sir.
Awesome. So do you want to walk us through your background a little bit and kind of some of the, you don't have to give me everything, but some of the highlights that as you kind of climb the ladder into your current role and what got you thinking about the material that you wrote for the book?
Absolutely. So my career started actually in film and television. Went to USC, worked for a couple of different studios for a few years after college, and learned that I wasn't particularly inspired by the gatekeeping that is kind of the fundamental construct of Hollywood. But what I liked about filmmaking was that it was a team sport. You had to have a big vision, and you needed a cross-functional team. Lots of different specializations required to bring the big vision to reality. But what I realized was that there was another place like that where you had the same cross-functional teams, the big vision, and no gatekeepers, and that was Silicon Valley. So I ended up building out my first company, servicing the studios. In fact, I was a small creative shop, went from 2 to 200 in 2 years, and sold actually to another UK firm, oddly enough. And then I thought I'd figured it all out, moved up to the Bay, started a restaurant franchise ERP platform that managed front of house, back of house, menu mix analysis, supply chain, and ended up selling it to our largest customer who dominated our product roadmap. So I had made a lot of the early mistakes that you make building software companies. Thought I had it all figured out. Clearly I hadn't, and ended up back in LA right at the perfect time, the inflection point for the second coming of online video, and co-founded a company called TubeFilter, which was originally a video analytics platform, which turned into a content company. Built out the Streamy Awards, which we just signed our second 10-year deal with Dick Clark Productions a few years ago.
That's with Drew, right?
Yep, that's exactly right. Yep, Drew Baldwin, Mark Hustevet. We merged with Tilsey TV, Josh Cohen and Jameson Tilsner. There was like the New York branch of the online video journalism world, and then in 2010 was left TubeFilter and was focused on starting my next thing, a agency platform to monetize entrepreneurial talent, and ended up attempting to recruit a couple of guys out of a web dev shop called CitrusBite, which was based in LA, and ended up falling in love with the team and the way that they thought and the engineering talent, which had always been a hard thing for me to wrap my head around and effectively recruit. So I'd made a promise up to my first services company never to go back into professional services. I find myself suddenly back in that world and actually really loving it. And that time around, I realized that it was a tremendous blessing, a huge opportunity to be able to walk into the C-suite of an organization 1,000 times your size, and they open up the books, open up the kimono, and ask you for help. And it's like getting an MBA multiple times a year if you do it right. And I ended up spending the next 12 years building that firm out into the preeminent innovation and product delivery firm for the Fortune 1000. Worked with literal who's who of the biggest, most ambitious brands in the world, and then sold that company to, as you said, Sir Martin Sorrell, who a few years before had founded S4 Capital, and rolled up 34 companies in 4 years, which is really breakneck speed.
Mhm.
And now run the technology services division. Along the way, I spent a lot of time working inside of large scaled organizations like Apple, Google, AT&T, and really dozens of more of that similar caliber. And the experiences that I found inside those organizations for the folks doing the frontline work really encouraged me to uh, uh, build out a transformation capability that helped those organizations to fundamentally reframe the way that they facilitated innovation at scale. And that became a really important part of the work that we did and that we do at Formula.Monks today. Uh, so 3, 4 years ago, I thought, it would be great to start to write these things down. Spent a career, learning and experimenting and finding a sense of objective truth and what works and what doesn't. And turns out that writing a book was insanely more difficult than I had anticipated it would be. So it took me a better part of 3 years to get it
Wow.
out. Writing in small increments. At first, I thought I'll block out 2 or 3 hours twice a week. I'll get it done. That did not work for me. I think my brain, being in a leadership role for a long time, had my brain had rewired. And what I used to be a momentum based worker, and suddenly ended up really needing the frenetic pace of 15-minute increments. So
Mm.
through the course of a couple of months, realized that was the only way I could write 3 15-minute blocks a day, every day, 7 days a week. And that's how I cranked the book out. And that's also why it took 3 years.
Yeah, I love it. Well, we'll get into your writing process some more because I'm fascinated by that element of it. I'm writing a book right now too, so I'm always excited to talk to other authors about what their process is. And being a similar guy that started off in the entertainment industry and then fell into tech and advertising, I think you must have had a creative bent in you, wanting to go into that, profession, or even going to school for that. So I imagine writing the book helped you kind of fulfill a creative journey as well.
Absolutely. First time in a long time, I made something that I was making,
Yeah. And
which was really rewarding.
that's cool. Yeah. And another thing that I loved about how you framed it in the book of why you wrote it, and I think this is common with a lot of business books that I've been reading recently. You mentioned as a services provider, you guys can only take on so many projects every single year. And to some degree, there's probably only a certain caliber of enterprise that can afford the work that you do. So the book allows you to kind of put your IP and your theses in the hands of as many people who want to potentially learn from it and maybe actionable, put some of those insights into practice as well.
That's exactly right. Yeah, with knowledge, you can have exponential impact. When you're trading in dollars for hours, you have a kind of a linear impact. You can only do so much with so many clients. Rate limited, of course, by the scale of the size of your team and number of hours in a day. So the book was definitely a way to take and package up uh, all this knowledge that had been accumulated, over the course of 15 years and set it free.
I love it. I love it. So that leads to my first question. So, what inspired you to write the book? I know you mentioned that this was kind of an amalgamation of all of the things that you guys have learned through the 15 years of consulting for these enterprises around innovation and how to create strong performing teams. But what was the commonality that you were seeing inside of some of these customers and these case studies that you outlined in the book that made you think that this smaller, more agile, team-based structure is the mode that companies should adopt if they want to get serious about innovation?
I think that most organizations tend to, as they get more complex with scale, they tend to start to aggregate um, around centers of influence, core functions of the business, and those become gravity wells into which resources, capital, and talent start to fall. And all of a sudden, you wake up one day and you've got these monolithic silos that are the result of that consolidation of influence and organization, and the efficiencies that you expect to obtain with scale. But they also tend to be a source of tremendous friction, and they lead to a lot of over politicization inside of an organization. They create a lot of obstacles to progress, and it's not so much because they are inherently flawed. It's that fundamentally, as you grow something, communication channels and pathways become incredibly complex, and the amount of overhead you need to manage a large machine is exponentially greater than what you need to manage a small team. And you start producing, there's kind of two kinds of waste. There's good waste and bad waste. And as you scale a large organism, you start producing a lot of the bad kind of waste, which is not small digestible failures. It's large monolithic failures that can go they can go wrong all at once on a really large scale. So the ideas in Smaller and Better really are philosophy number one, number two, practical guidance for how to actually decompose those monoliths from the bottom up, from the edges in, and start taking those principles that are outlined in the book and apply them to small teams that are imbued with autonomy, empowered with transparency and visibility into the core data that's driving your business, and the social structures that are needed to facilitate the kinds of high performing environments that really allow an organization to be that gives them an unfair advantage in their market.
I love that. And when was it in your career that you were first exposed to this type of management structure and this idea of the small autonomous team? Like, when was that light bulb lit up for you?
Yeah, I think I'd spent a lot of my career, building and scaling organizations, but not having a lot of practical education in management, and therefore the idea of building top down never seemed to really. I just didn't inherently understand it because I hadn't gone through business school. I didn't think about the target state and build to it. I thought about the increments, how we go from here, to the next 5 feet in front of us, and so I think when we started to really service large scaled organizations, it became immediately evident the reason they wanted to work with us was because we were able to get more done faster. And you start breaking that down, and the reasons why, it almost always came down to the way work was being done. It wasn't the quality of the people. It wasn't the value of the investments that were being made. It wasn't the alignment that a wonderful mission can create. It really just came down to the environment in which work was being performed. And large scaled organizations really struggled to create environments that retain high performing talent and enabled them to actually deliver outsized results. So I think it was a really natural evolution, drawn very much, conclusions drawn very much from the reality of the demand that existed for the kinds of results that a small team could produce.
Do you think it was also informed by your working within startup environments earlier in your career, knowing that, startups don't have the luxury of, 3-year planning cycles and $15 million budgets for projects, and you've got to move fast and iterate quickly, and kind of the idea behind pivots and stuff like that?
Absolutely. I think when you're scrappy, you don't have the luxury to step back and invest in a lot of robust planning and strategy processes. And I think really, when you break it down, most plans don't survive first contact with the enemy. It's important to have a plan, because it rallies and focuses the people in your organization around a destination you want to reach. But if you stay committed to the plan at all costs, you usually end up going in the wrong direction. And so I think you're absolutely right. Working inside of startup environments, you have to be really judicious about where to invest, and you're almost always going to have a bias towards action, because you need to see if what you're imagining will work, and you want to do that as soon as you possibly can.
Yeah.
Anything that separates you from that reality is suboptimal.
Yeah, and I liked you outlined the idea of needing to ship product. Done beats perfect, I guess, is a phrase that I've heard many times. And until you get your product shipped and into the marketplace, and until you can get feedback from users and customers, you're kind of, creating something in a vacuum, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. The further you delay that, the worse it gets. Matt Mullenweg from WordPress, I think, says it well. If you're not embarrassed by your product launch, you haven't gone fast enough. You waited too long, and it's so true. It's so true.
Yeah, that's a great one. I've been listening to his co-founder Noah stuff recently, and yeah, that's a pretty exciting team. So you outlined this idea of 5 to 8 kind of being the sweet spot of a small autonomous team. What's special about that magic number between 5 to 8, and why is that the secret sauce?
There's a lot of really good science behind it that is above my pay grade. But when you look at and there's a few pages into the first chapter, there's a great outline of this. When you look at the communication overhead, every time you add a node to your team size, it starts to get exponentially more complex. Like the number of connections inside of a 2-person team, there's 1, right? A 3-person team has 3, right? Yeah, 3, exactly. All of a sudden, when you get to 5, 8, 10, like the number of connections between that you have to maintain, the relationships that have to be built and supported grow exponentially. And that adds a tremendous amount of overhead to a team. Plus, there is, I think, this reality that the way that we operate inside of a small team encourages us to support one another. There isn't space or opportunity to wait for those around you to fail, because if they do, then you do too. So there's no excess, there's no buffer in a small team, and I think that encourages the kinds of behavior that you want in a high performing organization. On top of that, it also requires real, true cross-functional thinking, because you don't have the benefit of of having a team generally full of experts. You need a lot of generalists, and generalists tend to do better at the cross-functional thinking that's needed to produce exceptional results. So a core tenet of the book is, with a small team, you need to populate it with all of the functions that are required to go to market. So anything that gets outsourced, whether it's legal or marketing or sales, is a failure point. You need to literally ingest those functions into the team, give it the complete ability, not just the responsibility, the autonomy, but the actual ability to take a product to market, cross the penny gap, and generate revenue.
Yeah, and I think you also mentioned like not having some of those functions that might be traditionally thought of as later stage, like legal is usually the last stop on the road, where maybe if you would have involved legal earlier in the process, you would have not done some things that you knew or didn't know weren't compliant, or against
Totally,
or something like that.
and it also gets them invested too. And now your success is their success. They're not a gatekeeper. They own the victory just as much as you do. And you're right. They can help you to avoid the landmines that in a more traditional process might not emerge until you're near the finish line.
Yeah. And can you talk more about the idea that, yes, this is a autonomous team of, supposed equals, but the importance of also having a leadership structure, somebody who's responsible for the mission?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the autonomy in my mind is more about autonomy from the organization. Individuals inside the team need to be a cohesive unit. They need to understand that any one individual's failure is the failure of the collective whole. One of the cross-functional roles in the team is leadership. Leader is there, in my mind, as the base of an inverted pyramid. They're there to support the frontline folks doing the work. They're there to create the environment for success. Leadership is just one of many functions, though. So if you're building a software product, you need great engineers, you need great product managers, great designers, you need great leaders, and you need great leaders who are approaching leadership from a servant leadership mentality, in my opinion.
Mhm.
Not leadership that is about command and control, top down. That pattern that you see inside of large organizations works just as poorly inside of a small team.
Got it. Got it. And then you also outlined the idea that the team essentially needs a mission or kind of one thing to focus on at a time. I think a lot of times we fancy ourselves as people who can multitask and work on multiple projects and spin multiple plates at once. But can you talk a little bit more of that specificity around having a unified mission and a single thing to work on at a time?
Yeah, I think organizations, mostly reflect their component parts, and companies are largely, composed of humans, and humans love novelty. So we do want to have many plates spinning all at once. But the reality is, when you do that, you can't achieve the compounding effect of focus. So when you
Mm,
focus on one thing, when you're making progress for a very long time, it looks like no progress is being made. And then as you start to stack the compounding effect of progress on top of itself, you start to reach that inflection point where exponential upside is actually possible. And a team is no different than an individual in that regard. If you diffuse the focus across too many priorities, in my opinion, anything more than really one, you compromise the ability to guarantee the outcome.
mm,
Someone much smarter than me once said, uh, the best way to ensure your priority or your plan A fails is to have a plan B. And
mm.
and and I think when you take those other options off the table, and you crystallize the focus around that single, really well defined, measurable objective, it catalyzes the kind of behavior that actually drives exceptional results.
Yeah, no, I love that. And so, from the work, you had so many great case studies and examples inside of the book, but is there one that stands out to you where you came into a client and started to implement this team-based structure, and what were some of the results that you saw?
Yeah, one of my favorites is one of our large telecom clients that came to us with uh, a challenge. They had uh, a line of business that was suffering significant year-over-year margin compression, and it was an infrastructure service that was designed to sell into a B2B environment, and that margin compression was largely because the underlying service was completely commoditized, and they needed to find a way to reverse course. What we found when we engaged with them was not that they weren't spending a tremendous amount of money to try to solve that problem. They had extreme amounts of bets, extreme number of bets that were being placed, but the way they were being placed and the parallelization of those bets into these monolithic organizations, it was almost like they were innovating um, in lock, stock, and barrel with their org chart. It's kind of like organizations that sell their org chart. Similar
Mm,
challenges there, right? If you take your internal mess and you organize your products or your service lines around it, it doesn't work particularly well. In this case, it really wasn't working. They were spending boatloads of money, and they were getting literally zero result. They had one team that was over 1,000 people working on a single initiative that was originally designed to deliver a commercial release in 3 years, and they'd been at it for six. We're talking
wow.
about large scale, long term bets. We were able to slash their innovation budget by a massive percent. We're talking over 80% cut. We spread the remaining 20% across small teams that intentionally were designed to, in parallel, compete against the same priorities. So we used an internal marketplace uh, to uh, uh, to solve for um, uh, the uh, the guarantee side of the outcome created the redundancy inside of the bet. But then also intentionally descoped the size of the teams down to teams that were roughly 5 to 15 people, so a little bit larger than the ideal size in some cases. But that was the nature of the problems they were solving. And it took their product realization life cycle from something that was in reality probably close to 5 years to go from original hypothesis to commercial release to something that was dramatically accelerated. We were shipping products with those teams in like 90 days.
Wow.
We're talking out to market, crossing the penny gap, full support for revenue generation, not just hypothetical pie in the sky pilots or MVPs. It was real production grade software. Now the outcome at first blush was phenomenal, but it didn't really stop there. The real transformation occurred when they started to look at their much broader set of technology investments, and they started to apply the same approach, decomposing the monolithic teams into much smaller mission-oriented focuses, and it really completely reshaped the way that they invested in technology infrastructure.
Wow. Yeah, I think that was the example that you outlined where, that larger project was like a $15 million project. And then you kind of broke it down into these smaller $100,000 innovation, kind of strike forces, if you will, for lack of a better word. And can you talk a little bit about that idea that when you give a team autonomy over their budget and then make it, something that's smaller and manageable. And if you fail and you lose 100K, that's a lot better than losing 15 million. But kind of how that constrained budget, but ownership over that creates kind of guardrails and a sandbox into which, more ownership takes place.
Totally. Yeah, I think there's something really empowering when you give a team true autonomy and you invest in them like you would invest in a startup. It imbues them with that sense of ownership that drives the best outcomes, the best results. I think when you take and decompose these monolithic investments that many organizations make, at first blush the reaction is, well, we can't possibly achieve that result if we don't bring all these resources to bear. But that's not how innovation actually works. There's a concept in the investing community of trend following. And trend following, conceptually, when something's working, you put more money into it. And the same thing works in innovation. When something's working, you double down on the investment. But you need a large sample set to actually figure out what's going to work and to increase the probability of success. So that the $15 million monolithic investment is generally placing all the bets on a single place on the table, and that is inherently risky because everything has to go right. Many organizations design themselves and organize themselves to achieve success, but in doing so, they attempt to remove all the risk. What you really should design for is failure. Designed to fail in small increments, do it at high velocity, and embrace risk as the necessary ingredient to achieving success. So organizations, I think, fundamentally are designed, and you see this in a lot of large-scale enterprises. They attempt to take all the risk out. They want to minimize risk, maximally minimize risk, and over time that starts to actually slow them down because everything that they do now becomes this huge, complex machine that they have to turn around, and you just can't pivot, a battleship like that fast. You can do it if you've got a ton of little boats in the water, though.
Yeah, innovation at the end of the day is risk taking, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And organizations don't necessarily know where they are, in their own narrative. Are they on the rising action? Have they reached the climax? Are they on the falling action? and because you don't know, you can't necessarily, you can easily misinterpret how capable you are.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Example that I had heard recently, a friend of mine hired a product manager at his startup, and this gentleman worked at Target during COVID. He was a product owner, and he was responsible for a team of 6 people that basically built Target's entire curbside pickup infrastructure within 6 weeks of COVID kind of happening.
Wow.
Yeah. So if you think about like from the outside looking in, you would think that that was a massive undertaking done by many, many people in order to bring that service to market that fast. But in fact, it was exactly the type of team that you're describing in the book.
Makes total sense. I mean,
Mhm.
that does not surprise me. It is remarkable how many stories you hear like that. Massive uh, accomplishments from unreasonably small teams.
Yeah. And I think that became, 50% of Target's revenue stream outside of e-commerce post pandemic, or during the pandemic. So, um,
And if you tried to do that, maybe in a different environment at a different time, could be tens
yeah, good luck.
of millions of dollars spent, right? And maybe end up with nothing.
Totally. So another component that you outlined is how important this team structure is going to be, or is, in the birth of AI becoming more and more important and more integrated into corporate cultures and workflows. Can you talk about some of the reasons why this is even more important in the ever increasing adoption of AI into all of our daily lives from a work perspective?
Absolutely. I think AI, and this will sound hyperbolic when I say it, but AI will be the the most important change in human evolution in the last 500 years.
Hmm.
More important than the printing press, more important than the advent of the steam engine, more important than electric, electric, electrification, more important than microprocessors. Um, when you think about our own evolution as a species, as a civilization, we're rate limited by one thing, and that's the capacity of human intelligence. So today, we have roughly 8 billion human brains on the planet. Being able to focus those um, compute cycles essentially on a narrow set of problems is really hard, because most of our mental capacity is spent doing is like really diffused across these individual efforts that are really personal and don't really add up to system wide value.
Mhm.
With AI, you have the possibility of a virtually, maybe not unlimited, but near unlimited capacity of new human brains coming online that can actually be focused very specifically on solving a narrow range of problems. Anything from solving a disease or addressing climate change, and anything in between. That is going to be this unfathomable change in the way that we actually leverage intelligence. Organizations today, large scale organizations, invest a tremendous amount into their scale. There, it's a lot of carrying capacity, a lot of overhead required to operate a machine with 10,000 or 50,000 or 100,000 humans working in it. And AI is going to level the playing field. It's going to enable me and you to compete with the enterprise as individuals, because all
Wow.
of the complexity of the overhead that you need to invest in, whether it's an airline generating 1% margins, or a tech startup generating 30 or 40% EBITDA margins, there's a tremendous amount of overhead in there, right? Maybe your OpEx is 20%, maybe it's 40%, maybe it's 60%. Who knows? But that OpEx is there largely to deal with the scale, the complexity of the machine that you built, operating it, running it, monitoring it. AI is going to take over so much of that heavy lifting and do it at
Mhm.
a fraction of the cost. But more importantly, it's going uh, to be scalable horizontally. So instead of all of us having to aggregate around a large machine, each of us can run a large scaled machine. All the overhead will be managed through automation, and we'll be able to focus on the high value effort of building products and services or delivering them.
Wow. Yeah, that's quite a lot to get my head wrapped around. But yeah, no, I think as AI continues to free up, the mundane parts of work and allows us to focus on deep work and the things that are really meaningful that move business forward. I think about that and just the practicality of, you know, if I wanted to, I could have had AI do the research for this podcast. I don't, because I feel that there's still um, a chemistry that I get from doing the research myself. That when I get on,
Totally.
I feel like I know you a little bit already because I did the research myself. But if I wanted to, I could have said, hey, Bard, give me the 10 questions that I should ask Bradley about his new book, and that would have been that. But it's nice to know that it's there if I need it. And yeah, like you're talking about, like the implications of how smaller teams will be able to compete with larger organizations through the power of AI is pretty exciting. So yeah, I tend to be a bullish fan of the what's coming our way versus the Luddite that's fearful that it's going to replace me or whatever. I always think, as a business development person, hopefully AI won't be able to buy anybody a steak dinner or take them to a Laker game. No.
No, I think to on the contrary, in fact, AI will increase the value of human interaction.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
I think we'll be spending more time in the flesh with people. That's great.
Wow.
It won't necessarily have to be in the office, right? But like, to get a deal done, it won't necessarily be safe to rely on Zoom,
Mm-hmm.
right? AI will be able to approximate digital versions of humans so well that you'll want to sit down across the table and look someone in the eye and shake their hand to
Yeah.
to ink a deal or to sell something or to start something. So I think AI is going to actually lead to this renaissance of human interaction, which I'm thrilled about. It means we won't be spending 90% of our day typing and clicking buttons on a screen, which I think will be a dramatic improvement for all of us.
Oh yeah, I'll look forward to that. Post COVID, after we lost our team, became distributed and moved across the country and lives in different places, and I truly miss going into the office and that collaboration. And I think even though COVID's behind us, I still I find it a lot harder post COVID to get people to commit to meeting in person than they did.
Totally.
I feel like before COVID, it was almost an expectation that you would jump on a plane to go see a client for a meeting or something like that. And maybe to some degree, we've created some efficiencies through some of the innovations through, video calling and things like that. But yeah, I'm looking forward to a world where we spend more time in personal interaction. So I like your outlook. Can you talk a little bit about the idea of good waste? I thought that was a fascinating concept about, sometimes it's important to build in those contingencies that may seem like waste at the time, but allow you to have, some varied options to get to the end goal line. I thought that was fascinating.
Totally. Yeah, I think a lot of organizations look at waste as a negative, but waste is really the cost of progress. Experimentation requires failure. Failure generates waste. So if you think about it, waste is the ingredient that actually helps you find the solution, helps you achieve the end goal, and optimizing to remove it tends to remove the very possibility of progress. Um, even on a small scale, redundancy in many organizations is considered to be inefficient. Enabling folks in the front lines to choose their own tools is in many cases anathema to the idea of efficiency. And you'll have CIOs and CTOs who work really hard to restrict or limit the number of tools in their stack. But the reality is that is optimizing for the wrong thing. Removing the individual on the edge, their ability to choose their own tool, the tool that they know will help them accomplish their job best, is crazy.
Yeah.
But so many organizations do it. They say, no, we got one, tool for X, and everyone has to use it. And in the meantime, you've got the startup down the street who's moving from Photoshop to Figma, and they're crushing your team's productivity because they can collaborate in real time online. It's insanity, but it's also the dogma side of the enterprise in many cases. Everyone's looking for for standardization. I think that's largely because there are maybe two kinds of people, and this is a broad, gross generalization. But you've got builders and makers, and then you've got scalers,
Mm.
and scalers tend to value what they do best, and builders and makers tend to value what they do best. And there's often a friction between them. The best organizations that I've seen, that I've witnessed, that I've been a part of, embrace that friction. They support it. They encourage it, because you need the scalers to build the repeatable processes that lead to the efficiencies that allow for growth. But you also need the builders and the makers to come in and break things and to reinvent them, and to deliver on the promises that the future will bring. And if you isolate, one kind of worker from your organization at the expense of the other, or you encourage one and discourage the other, you lose the value of the creative destruction that those two worlds actually bring together and drive in your organization.
Yeah, I like that. And if you leave the ability for people to kind of tool to their teams the different software and tech that they need, I imagine that allows a lot more for discovery, right? Like the guy that picks the new and up and coming thing, maybe that is the right tool for the entire organization, but you wouldn't know if the innovator type who likes to try the newest, greatest thing didn't discover it on behalf of the entire organization.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, I like that. So, can you talk a little bit about the idea of radical transparency? I thought that was also an interesting way to approach enterprise. The idea that giving people the maximum amount of access to the data that they need to see can sometimes feel scary and maybe a little like you're opening up the kimono. But what kind of outcomes does that lead to?
Yeah, I think that the natural inclination for most organizations is to silo information. Early in my career, that's what was my way of working too. I think there's a common misconception that if you give people the full truth, they won't be able to handle it.
Hmm.
That it will lead to anxiety and will lead to um, fear and uncertainty and doubt. But the reality is that decision making is and effective decision making is probably the most critical aspect of any organization. When you bring a group of people together, their efficacy is going to parallel the effectiveness of their decision making. Because at the end of the day, when you're trying to accomplish something, you just have to break it down into a bunch of small decisions. Uh, Decisions are best made when you have access to the objective reality that you operate in, and the more that you can provide transparency into the objective reality, the more effective and efficient the decision making is, and therefore the more effective and efficient the team is. So radical transparency as a philosophy, as a concept, is really about that intentionality. How can I arm you with as much information as you possibly need and the context around it, so that you can make effective decisions? In many organizations, decisions are made several steps away from truth, and therefore they tend to be disconnected from the folks who are actually best able to make them, and who also benefit the most, and the organization benefits the most when they're made on the edge. Um, and of course, there are limits in some organizations to what you can share. There's classic examples of companies that fully open their compensation
Hmm.
information, and the power the powerful outcomes that generates. But that might not be right for every company.
Hmm.
There are plenty of examples where that might not be the most optimal thing. But conceptually and philosophically, the more that you can expose the data that drives your business, the more effective the decisions made using that data will actually be. And it's particularly important to provide that information cross-functionally too. So exposing the actual feedback from real clients to your finance team, as opposed to having sales as a filter in between them or a translator, is going to drive the kind of synergies that you just can't get if you're playing a game of telephone.
Yeah. And I like that you kind of broke that down into a management philosophy that you guys implement inside of your organization from the perspective of feedback. Not waiting till the 2 times a year annual performance review to share with colleagues and managers of how you think they're doing and how their performance is being measured. Can you talk a little bit about this idea of real-time feedback and how to implement that, and maybe some of the challenges that go with implementing it on the front end, but what you've seen as a byproduct of once it's completed its cycle and becomes part of the culture?
Yeah. The transition to real-time feedback is quite unnerving, because the process in and of itself requires a deep level of commitment to getting to the other side. I think in many organizations where the kind of traditional dogma encourages the structured performance review process, whether that's annual, quarterly, or a 360 review, it disconnects the point of feedback from the actual value that it can create. Good feedback can be implemented now, and good feedback is also an investment that we are making in each other. Performance reviews tend to end up being tremendously stale by the time they're delivered, and they often feel more punitive than anything. And frankly, I think the way they're often leveraged is on behalf of HR as a way to manage and extract people from an organization. And so I think that reality permeates the experience, and I think that in many organizations, the time and the effort required to actually engage in an effective performance review process just isn't there. And so what you're left with is kind of a performative experience. Whereas real-time feedback, you take all of the structure, all of the decorum and the formality out of it, and you make it about one human investing in another. And it's most powerful when it happens in literal real time. So if we're on a call with a client, and you see me do something that isn't creating the kind of outcome that we're attempting to create, the moment that call ends, we're on the phone together doing a quick retro, and you're giving me that feedback in real time. That feedback is now going to be actionable on my next call. I'm not going to have to wait 3 months to get that feedback from you, at which point I don't even recall the context for that feedback. So the incremental, continuous improvement that real-time feedback can deliver actually levels your people up, and does it now, which is the point of feedback. The process of doing it is challenging, because I think in a lot of organizations, feedback almost always feels punitive. And so you have to go to great lengths to model the right kind of behavior, delivering feedback in a way that doesn't result in defensiveness, that doesn't result in retaliation. And what I've seen as the most effective starting point is really with a leadership team, modeling real-time feedback in front of the entire organization, and sending a lot of feedback up the stack, and creating venues and opportunities for frontline folks to provide the real hard-hitting feedback that most executives never have the opportunity to receive.
Yeah. And I think you also mentioned that you guys even implement it with clients. You teach clients about it, which I thought was very interesting, because I imagine when you open up that type of channel for bilateral feedback with clients, I imagine that accelerates the depth of your relationship with clients, and probably create stickier clients and maybe opportunities to grow with clients. So have you seen it have an impact on client retention or winning deals, things like that?
Absolutely. I think in particular, it allows you to penetrate much more deeply into your clients' organizations
Mm-hmm.
because they tend to become a bit addicted to the process, and I think it also gets them a better result because it encourages. It's a two-way valve, right? You're helping them to get the best out of you, and vice versa. And once you start engaging in that kind of process and you see the results that you get from your partners when you embrace these tools, you want to spread it. And so it creates these really phenomenal opportunities to move horizontally through an org. One of the things that we often will do is take from a beachhead inside of an organization, working with a leader that's a little bit more progressive and a little more forward leaning, um, implement the system, let the other leaders around that leader observe the results and the quality of the outcomes you can produce, and then we'll actually do a dedicated multi-month training program for leadership. And now we're sitting in a position where we are helping that organization to create exponential upside, because we can't service the entire org. It's just not possible, right? Nor would it be wise for an organization to double down on a single partner that way. But in empowering those leaders with the same tools, it actually makes our job easier because now we're able to help our stakeholder penetrate their own organization in a way that maybe wasn't previously possible.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I love that. So I want to pivot the conversation a little bit into your process as a writer and also on the marketing of the book itself. So you've already alluded a little bit to your process that you had to kind of rewire your brain to become a writer again, where you found it most effective for you to get into the regular process of writing every single day. So making sure that the consistency was there, but kind of blocking and tackling it in 15-minute increments. I find that fascinating because I take a little while to get in the zone sometimes, when I'm trying to be creative. My process is I actually, I'm working with a book coach. So throughout the week, I will come up with little snippets when I'm on runs, and usually not actually doing work. When I'm focused on more mundane things is when insights kind of hit me. And then I'll kind of trial test concepts on Twitter or LinkedIn to see if they stick. And the ones that stick, then I turn into blocks that I dictate, on the phone when I walk around with him for about an hour. But I'm just curious, how do you get in the zone and make those 15 minutes count when you're doing them, when that to me feels like a short amount of time?
Yeah, I think when I started the process, I decided that I would work the way I used to work.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like I said earlier on, I would chunk out 2 or 3 hours. But what I realized very quickly was those weren't very productive
Mm-hmm.
hours for writing, because I ended up filling it with a bunch of other high urgency tasks.
Mm-hmm.
I have a really interrupt-driven schedule. The interruptions just kept flowing. Um, Even if I turned my phone off and turned off Wi-Fi, it was just too much time out of the action. It's like my brain had just been rewired from all these years of working at a really kind of frenetic pace.
Yeah.
So I tried like blocking out all of Saturday, and I would have Saturday set aside for writing. Similar outcome, just didn't really make any progress. So I think it after maybe even 6 months of trying different approaches, I just leaned into the way I actually worked on a
Yeah.
daily basis, which is rapid fire, little chunks of time spread, and quick pivots, context shifting all day long. So I tried that, and I was kind of amazed at the results. It's like having that 15-minute deadline like encouraged me to actually get stuff out and down on paper.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always the highest quality, but the editing process, I do the same thing. I go back and I read and move things around, but I'm really religious about when I do it, phones down, Wi-Fi off, no distractions. And I'm really religious about capping it too, so that
Mm-hmm.
I don't start to feel like it's taking over. It's just a thing I do 3 times a day. the most productive writing session for me is the evening one.
Ah,
Usually in the morning, I'm so focused on the day that I'm just kind of putting some light, outlines on paper. Midday, usually I'm actually translating my experiences that I'm having that day onto the paper, which is actually really helpful. So it's like real time, translation of the challenges or the opportunities or the learnings that I had that day. And then the evening is where it's more of the esoteric, philosophical. I sit down after dinner before going to bed, and I tend to have the most narrative, kind of high concept output at that time.
yeah, I love it. And I almost feel like it harkens a little bit back to, the ideas in the book where, having shorter sprints for innovation and a constraint of that 15-minute increment, shorter windows, shorter time, but you have to be more purposeful because, you've got that
Exactly.
short window. You've got to get to work, and you don't have an hour or two to, brainstorm before you get to work. So I think it almost dovetails well into some of your philosophies that you outlined in the book. So that's very fascinating. I was pleased to learn about that. So you mentioned, 3 years in the making. So what was the marketing plan that you kind of worked with yourself and with your publisher as you got the book ready? I know that you and I were connected because I saw you on LinkedIn. And you had mentioned that the book had become a bestseller. So, congratulations on the success of the
Thank
book.
you so much.
Yeah, of course. So tell me a little bit about, your marketing strategy. What was your plan, and how were you able to hit the bestseller list?
I've been heads down for so long building my current business that I had kind of taken a break from engaging in something I used to do a lot, which was um, sharing my experiences, my thoughts, my perspectives with my community. And
Mm,
I'd probably been out of that game for like almost 10 years.
wow.
And as I was finishing the book, I realized I don't really have much of a platform, and I haven't done much personal brand building. So I use the book as a catalyst to do a lot of things that I had been putting off for a long time, like building a personal website, actually getting active on LinkedIn and getting active on Twitter, and stop and stop doing what I had to do, which is like waiting for the perfect time in my career or in my life to re-engage. So I just ripped the
Mhm.
band-aid off and
Yep.
just started. I used the same approach, 15-minute increments, because the book was done. So I needed to repurpose that time. Just started writing content for
Mhm.
LinkedIn. And that actually was awesome. Like so many people came out of the woodwork that I hadn't talked to in forever. So they're like, "Oh, hey, I haven't thought about you in X number of years. It's awesome to see you and you're alive." If you're not active, no, you don't show up in anyone's feed, and
Right.
and
Right.
and you just get you get left out of the dialogue. So that was really inspiring, and I realized through that process that authenticity sells, engagement is critical. I also leveraged a lot of interesting kind of pockets of the internet. Reddit was particularly useful. I spent a
Mm.
lot of time writing long form content on Reddit in communities that are hyper targeted to um, the 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 um, the topic of the book, and that was a tremendous source of support, feedback, and also readers. So
Mm.
looking at we used a couple of tools to really understand where inbound interest was coming through social campaigns and through content campaigns. And Reddit was a tremendous source of book buyers. I was actually kind of shocked
Yeah,
that it
that's
was one of the
great.
core drivers. And I think
Wow.
it's because Reddit has this interest, and it's like the communities are so hyper focused, and they typically are full of really engaged people who are really brilliant, who invest a lot of time in their area of interest.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's a great insight. I think, what's so important about marketing a book is I think finding your circles of influence, right? Like who is your tribe that this is really going to land with? And then how does that expand out to the second and the third circles organically? Who becomes your, your super users or your thousand loyal fans,
Exactly.
to say, and then they become the word of mouth engine that creates the groundswell that gets the book moving. So yeah, no, I love that. And that leads me kind of naturally into my next question, which is, so my agency is focused on enterprise B2B influencer marketing. So how do you leverage this new breed of content creators that are LinkedIn first and professional content creators on the platform? But then you've got, speaker, author, guru, consultants, fractionals that also have built large personal brands that you can tap into. And then you even have influential people within the C-suite or within your target accounts that you might be trying to penetrate as a marketer, as a salesperson. So you've obviously seen the power of LinkedIn being, something that can propel your personal brand and be an engine behind the book. And maybe inadvertently you've become an influencer again on LinkedIn because of your position at Formula.Monks and within S4, but also now as a speaker and an author. So how are you seeing LinkedIn as you're kind of becoming more active? Are you noticing the trend that LinkedIn is becoming more of a social network and something that enterprises can take advantage of from a marketing perspective?
Absolutely. And it's really fascinating because it seems to have just happened without a lot of fanfare, which I appreciate. Those are the best kinds of evolutions, the ones that happen transparently and don't even realize it's happening. I think LinkedIn is probably more active and more interesting to me than virtually any other social network now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's in part because there is an expectation that in order to participate, you need to create value. And I see it everywhere. Like the content that is being created in LinkedIn, pound for pound, is just so much more valuable than almost any other network. People are putting in time and effort into sharing their knowledge, their experiences, and it's creating this powerful vehicle to spread influence. And I think that it wouldn't surprise me if 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 LinkedIn started to expand its footprint inside the enterprise too. Right now, it's very much a one to many. Organizations are still not central to the LinkedIn experience, and I think there's going to be some interesting changes that will take place within the ecosystem.
Yeah.
I do think you're right though that all of a sudden LinkedIn is like has showed up in a really interesting way, and you've got folks who are really engaged, providing a tremendous amount of value, and are building brands that I think are also tremendously valuable on top of the platform.
Yeah, no, that's super cool. And I love the idea that LinkedIn will become more of an enterprise value. I think that was a big focus of why I launched this podcast. Is my CEO was really pushing us all to be more active on LinkedIn. And I am not what I would consider the best writer, but I absolutely love having conversations with people. So I figured, hey, if I can have a 1 hour conversation on my LinkedIn feed through live streaming, that's a much more appealing.
Brilliant.
That's a much more appealing way to communicate to my 30,000 followers. So that's what I did, and it's been very rewarding in the same way that you probably got a lot of value in road testing articles or newsletters or posts in the written form. And I think organizations need to first of all tell people what's in it for them. Like, why is it important, not just as an employee, but also as, hey, like if you build a great personal brand on LinkedIn, sadly, you might get recruited by a better company for a better job, but
That's
it's
exactly right. Yeah.
yeah, but it's our job as a company to empower you to do that, because if we're helping you share about the company in the modality that you feel most comfortable communicating to your audience, we should be able to give you the tools, whether that's video or audio or the written form or slide decks or audio events. I mean, LinkedIn gives you a lot of different ways to communicate with an audience. And I think the other thing that is really interesting is, LinkedIn is about to launch like a TikTok vertical video feed that's in beta
Yeah.
right now. So I don't know. They launched stories a while back, and that didn't really stick. So we'll see if this new, I don't want LinkedIn to become TikTok, but I do think I think the more it becomes social and video first, and some of these other modes, it'll be really interesting.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, it's a brave new frontier. It's hard to imagine, 15 years ago when you compare LinkedIn where it was to where it is today. It's like it's a totally different world. It's awesome.
Yeah, very cool. Well, hey, I've taken an hour of your time. This has been a fascinating conversation. I had a really great time reading the book today. So thanks again for being willing to come on the show. So for the last question, what are you most excited about the future of the work that you're doing at Formula.Monks, but also now that the book is out there, I imagine there's some opportunities to speak and get out there and further evangelize these ideas. So what are you most excited about the future?
A great question. I think the book was a phenomenal excuse to get all of these ideas out and down on paper, and it has been tremendously rewarding in terms of the feedback and the engagement that has resulted. I've already started working on book number 2, so that's
Wow.
really exciting. And I have a plan for a third one as well.
Go.
I think that what is probably most exciting though is getting is having conversations with people that read it. Frankly, I've read it so many times that after a while, I think I've read it 32 times, and it's just hard to know if it's good anymore.
Mhm.
But the questions that it raises when people read it, the conversations that I've had are tremendously rewarding and are teaching me a lot too. They're providing unique perspectives and shifting my views on the lessons that I've learned. And I have a feeling that the next book will probably be a lot more collaborative, and I'm really excited about that. Pulling in, other folks that have different experiences, bringing to the table to think about and tackle some really interesting problems that will face the the enterprise in the next decade. So
Wow.
I'm looking forward to it. Hopefully, it'll be good.
Yeah, well, I'm excited. I'll be waiting for the next release. So, well, thanks,
I really
Brady.
appreciate the time. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, no, super fun. Well, anything else you want to plug? Do you want to let people know where they can find it?
Sure thing. Yeah. If you are interested in the book, you can point your browser at www.smallerbetter.com. And if you want to get in touch with me, www.Brim-DeForest.com. Shoot me a note. My email's on there. There's a contact form. I'm super accessible. Always happy to chat. And if there's anything I can do to be helpful, just let me know.
Awesome. Well, we'll link to the book in the show notes. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in again. And if you loved the conversation that I had today with Brady, don't forget to subscribe wherever you're listening or watching the podcast. If you give us a review, that helps us find a larger audience. And most importantly, if there's a colleague within your professional network that you think would get value from the conversation I had with Brady today, don't forget to share the show with them. So thanks again so much, Brady, for coming on.
Thank you, sir. Have a great one.